to Tea with Tolkien, a podcast for the Hobbit at heart. I hope you all had a nice Christmas and are doing well in this new year. I know it's been a while since we've had an episode, but I'm very happy to be here. If you are following along with our Tea with Tolkien book club, then you'll know that this week we are beginning our read-along of The Silmarillion. And I'm pretty sure I said maybe in the first episode of this podcast that this wasn't going to be a book club podcast, but to be honest, it's a little bit difficult to come up with weekly podcast topics separate from a book club when you're doing a book club. And so I thought, I know a lot of you are going to be reading along with us, and this could be a helpful resource. So just going to ignore my previous promise, and this is going to become a book club podcast for the time being, at least. If you don't know what's going on at all with our book club, you can go to teawithtolkien.com/book-club and you can sign up and see everything that we're doing. If you want to sign up and join us, you can do so with your email address. You'll get an email each week, as well as the link to our Discord server where we will be doing most of our discussion. We also have a Facebook group, but I personally really do not like being on Facebook. Like, the format of Facebook just does not work for my brain, and I find myself getting very irritated when I'm on Facebook. So there is a Facebook group if you are really into Facebook and you would like to find other members of the Tea with Tolkien community who are on Facebook. There are quite a lot of people in that group, and you can find the links for that all on our website as well. But I just wanted to say that I don't like being on Facebook, and so the majority of our discussion will be done over Discord. Before we dive into the Silmarillion next week, I thought it would be helpful to spend a bit of time reading and discussing the Waldman Letter. The Waldman Letter is a letter, of course, written to Milton Waldman, an editor and advisor to publishers, who had expressed an interest in The Lord of the Rings and The Silmarillion after the widespread success of The Hobbit. So just for context, The Hobbit was published in 1937, and this letter was written in 1951. But The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, would not be published until 1954. So even though Tolkien wanted all of this to be published together as one massive book, we know that is not how it happened, and The Silmarillion wasn't actually published until after his death, which is kind of sad if you think about it, that he died not knowing that it would be published. And it's such a gift to us. I really love The Silmarillion. I think it's my favorite book for sure. So Tolkien had hoped to publish Lord of the Rings and The Silmarillion together, and I think this letter really reflects his belief that the two were interdependent. This letter can be read in a few places. In part, you can find it on the Tolkien Estate website. On their website, there is a large chunk missing in the middle of this letter in which Tolkien writes about the creation of his world and its history through the Second Age. So I'm not sure why they cut that part out. It's very long, so I guess that could possibly be why. So the full letter is not on their website, but this is a great free way to read at least a big chunk of the letter. You can also find the full letter in the Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, and it's number 131. This is the only place I've been able to find the full text of the letter, because it's also included in the preface to the Silmarillion if you own a second edition copy. But in the preface to the Silmarillion, it ends with the end of the Second Age, whereas the full letter goes through the Third Age. So I hope that's not too confusing, but if you would like to read the full text of the letter, as far as I can tell, the full text of the letter is only available in the Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. I have looked through maybe 3 or 4 different versions of the Silmarillion that I own, and they all end with the end of the Second Age. So that's a little confusing, and I'm not sure why it's published in different chunks with different pieces taken out, over various places. It doesn't make total sense to me, but who am I to know? I don't know. So anyways, this letter is important because it pieces together all of Tolkien's stories concerning Middle-earth, showing how they are all a part of this huge, massive, great tale. So the letter really takes you from the very beginning of the creation of this world all the way through the Silmarillion, the Hobbit, and the Lord of the Rings. And so it's just a massive letter, but it's very important. And I also want to say that it does contain spoilers, just since it contains so much information. So if you want to go into the Silmarillion completely blind about kind of the major plot lines, then I would recommend reading the letter that is available on the Tolkien Estate website, because they have just completely cut out the main chunk about the Silmarillion, and then it kind of just goes on to talk about the Lord of the Rings and Hobbits and stuff. So just a note, just something to think about if you don't want to kind of know what's going on. If you just want to be completely surprised, maybe don't read this letter. So what is in the Waldman letter exactly, you ask? Well, I love the way that Tolkien begins the letter. He writes, "My dear Milton, you asked for a brief sketch of my stuff that is connected with my imaginary world." And I love the way that Tolkien uses the word stuff, because I think a lot of the times we think of him as a philologist who loves words and language, and for him to use the word stuff is very startling. At least I thought it was to me. I thought it was a little bit funny. But I love to just see Tolkien kind of come to life in this more informal way of writing, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to kind of go through a bullet point list of the topics that are covered in his introductory remarks to this letter. First, Tolkien writes that he can't really remember a time when he wasn't building his imaginary world or its languages. He notes that almost all the names in his world are derived from these languages, which gives his work a really specific kind of consistency, which a lot of other bits of mythology or stories don't really have. He also writes that he's always been passionate about myth, and he desires a myth that is uniquely English, because he has studied all kinds of other myths from different origins, and he just felt like England was lacking a unique myth all its own. He also addresses that 3 major themes of his work are fall, mortality, and machine. He then goes on to write about the magic that the elves use versus the sort of magic that the enemy uses in his stories. He classifies the magic of the elves as being art, whereas he calls the enemy's use of magic as machine. And those two different kinds of magic, I think, play a very important role in all of his works and kind of understanding the difference between the two of them. After that, he launches into a summary of his world's history, from its creation all the way through its third age, which I will not attempt to summarize myself for the sake of brevity, because I don't want this podcast to be an hour long, and in hopes of just encouraging you to read this letter for yourself, because it's very interesting and important to kind of understanding the way that the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings fit together, the way that Tolkien felt about all of his works, and just the continuity between it. I think it's really interesting and really important. So thanks so much for listening to this little episode. I hope you all enjoyed it and found it helpful. It's just kind of like a crash course into the Waldman letter. I know a lot of podcasts on Tolkien are very long and relaxed and rambling, and you can kind of just listen for an hour or more, but that was never really my goal with this podcast. I love it being short and sweet. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your support. And if you want to become a patron and help support us as we are doing more book clubs and hopefully putting out more little tiny guides to the Silmarillion, you can find everything at patreon.com/teawithtolkien. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week as we begin the Silmarillion with Ainulindale and Valaquenta. I also just wanted to say really quickly, if you are interested in our book club but didn't catch the information at the beginning, you can go to teawithtolkien.com/book-club. This week, January 12th, we are discussing the Waldman letter, and next week we are going to be starting in on Ainulindale and Valaquenta. So you still have time to order your copy or get it from the library. And if you are listening to this and you're super annoyed because you don't even want to read the Silmarillion, but you're somehow listening to a podcast on Tolkien, I hope that you're very excited because you're kind of along for the ride. You're here now, so you might as well keep listening. Even if you don't want to go out and get a copy, I hope you'll keep listening to our weekly episodes. They'll kind of be an introduction, and hopefully along the way you'll become inspired to pick up this book, because I think it's Tolkien's greatest work. It's my favorite book ever, and it's a little bit intimidating. Maybe maybe a little bit dry at first. I don't think it's dry, but I do remember vaguely in the past thinking that it wasn't very interesting. But if you're already here, you might as well read it with us. So I'm happy to have you. And once again, I'll leave the links in the show notes. I haven't done a podcast episode in a while, so totally forgetting what everything's called. And before we go, I just wanted to say thank you to all of my generous and wonderful patrons. Clara, Julian, Ryan, Miracle Haven Garden, which is my mom, Evelyn, Victoria, Zach G, Madeline M, the Roman Circus Podcast, Michael, Teresa, Matt S, Prasoth, John and Greta, Rebecca, Aaron, Evelyn, Nathaniel, Theo, Tamara, Jane, Catherine, Father Adam, Christina, Patty, Marianne, Geeky Catholic Dad, Catherine, Paulina, Jerome, Amanda, Joanna, Carrie, Margaret, Leanne, Maggie, Carol, Benjamin, Anne, Anne-Marie, Lindsay, Lise, Sarah, and Shameless Papist. So thank you again so much for listening. Thank you to everyone. You're all so wonderful, and I will see you next week.